welcome to Commander Central, episode 339.5, and today we're going to be taking a look at a few of the cards that were just spoiled this weekend at Magic 30 from the Brothers War. I'm Dana. And yes, it's just me today. We're going to try something a little bit weird today. We had some scheduling conflicts and couldn't come together at the last minute. And in the past, we just have not put out a show that week. But I'm going to try something here a little bit different and just have me do something. So if this works out, maybe in the future when we have gaps in the schedule because of conflicting issues, we'll just do something like this. And if it doesn't work, we won't. So regardless, you guys have a 0.5 of a show this week with just Dana talking into a microphone. And what I thought I would do here is we had a bunch of cards spoiled over the weekend. I'm recording Saturday morning. So Friday night at the Command Zone Live, they previewed quite a few cards from Brothers War. We really don't do review shows anymore, in part because we do nothing but review shows, basically, given how often sets are coming out between, Commander decks and actual sets proper. We do, joking aside, 1 out of 4 shows would be a preview / a review show. So we just haven't been doing them. Haven't been doing them on EDH Rackcast for the same reason. And on top of the fact that there's a bunch of those shows, to really do a good review, it does take a little bit of time to kind of marinate in the cards a little bit and think about them and to do a decent analysis. So not only would you be doing 1 out of 4 shows just reviewing some kind of product, but because there has to be a little bit of a delay, I think, to really do a good job, you'd be talking about a set when the next set was already being spoiled or previewed, kind of. So there's a lot of reasons we haven't been doing them, but what I kind of want to do here is talk about a few of these cards that got previewed last night, and you're going to hear me talking about them kind of raw. Usually I have a few more days, like I said, to marinate in them and think about what I think, and I haven't really had a chance to do that. So some of my opinions are going to probably be wrong, or at the very least will change in the next couple of days, but I don't know, I thought it might be kind of interesting to record my thoughts on them upon first exposure before I've had a little bit of time to think, and maybe I will then kind of revisit this and see, if my opinions on some of these cards changed after I had a little bit of time to reflect on how effective they might actually be. I'm also primarily, I think, going to focus on non-commander cards, because that's a whole different thing. Looking at a card in a deck involves looking at it in a different way than looking at a card if it's going to be at the top of a deck. I think it's generally more useful for people out there to hear about cards in decks than it is to hear about commanders. Either a commander speaks to you or it doesn't speak to you, and if it speaks to you, then maybe you want to seek out that specific content for that one commander and see how people are building it or anything. But if it doesn't speak to you, if you don't care about Hurkyle Master Wizard or whatever, the odds of it being good in your deck are a little bit narrower too. So I'm just going to mostly focus on cards that are going to be popping up in the 99 here. And I've got a list up on MTG Nexus, and I'm just going to go through this list. In the first one that pops up here, we have In the Trenches. It's a mythic. It's 1 and 2 white for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1, so pretty standard Anthem. And that's a pretty standard cost for an Anthem too, which is strange that it's a mythic. And then we get to the next part of the card. For 5 and a white, you can exile target non-land permanent you don't control until In the Trenches leaves the battlefield. You can activate that only as a sorcery and only one single time. I'm guessing this is a mythic for limited and even maybe standard environments where they felt like that would be too strong of an effect. In Commander, that's not terrible. Basically, it's going to be an upgraded version of whatever Anthem you might be running in whatever deck you're running Anthems in. It's going to be doing the same thing that the intangible virtue you already have is doing, and then on top of that, it's going to have an ability you can use later in the game to get rid of a problem thing. I kind of like it. I think you are probably not going to be putting this in a deck that wasn't already running Anthems. So if you're playing, a Bird Tribal or, White Blue Merfolk or, maybe some kind of a Selesnya deck with tokens, although usually you're going to go with overruns there versus Anthems. But whatever the deck you're using that's going to be running Anthem kind of effects, this is probably an upgrade over one of those Anthems that you're running. Not terribly exciting card, and it kind of feels a little bit bad seeing that mythic, but there's some utility there. It'll see play. We have Kai's Command next, 1 and 2 white for sorcery. you choose two modes here. It's like a typical command card. Create a 2/2 colorless construct artifact creature token. Put a +1 counter on a creature you control and it gains double strike until end of turn. Search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. You gain 2 life and scry 2. Yeah, those all feel a little bit underwhelming. Gain life and scry 2 in particular feels pretty underwhelming. Getting a plains card in your hand and making a 2/2 construct, or giving a creature double strike when it swings in, and getting a plains card or making a construct or whatever. There's some combinations there that aren't terrible. I really wish it was an instant. Being able to swing in and then give the unblocked thing double strike feels way, way, way more useful than it is a sorcerer's feat when they can see it coming, particularly because, if you're not playing in green, you have way less options to have trample. This is fine, and it feels much more like a limited or standard card than it does a commander card, but there's probably some decks that want it. The fact that it creates a 2/2 colorless construct artifact creature token, there's probably some synergy there with some decks that maybe care about constructs, care about artifact creatures, but I'm again, first glance, like reading this card for the first time, I'm not really feeling it. Next we have Scrapwork Cohort, colorless artifact creature soldier. It's a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. Most importantly, it has Unearth for 2 and a white. So Unearth, for those who don't recall, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it gains haste, and you exile at the beginning of the next end step, or if it would leave the battlefield, and then Unearth is only a sorcery. So you're making, 4/2 worth of power on 2 bodies the first time you cast it. Has some utility from the graveyard. I'm torn. There's probably some sacrifice-based deck in Urza colors that might want it. It feels odd in white. I think you're seeing a bunch of white artifact stuff in the set, so it makes sense in the set. Again, top of my head, I'm not thinking of a lot of decks that really necessarily are craving this. It feels weird having 1 power, but that's actually probably a bonus. It gives you 2 Sculpt Clamp targets, so that's what I'm saying. Like, if there's some sacrifice-based deck, that might want it because you're going to get 2 bodies for 4 mana and then spend 3 more and get 2 more bodies. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's not terrible. Next is one that I did read a little bit ago, splitting the Power Stone. So this one I've had a few minutes to think about. 2 and a blue for sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you sacrifice an artifact. Create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. If the sacrificed artifact was a legendary, draw a card. The token the artifacts. So the Power Stone tokens are basically tapped to add a colorless mana, and this mana can't be used to cast a non-artifact spell. So you can use it for activate abilities, but you can't use it to cast a spell that isn't an artifact. So, Power Stones are basically fixed treasures as far as I can tell. I'm not sure if they're going to go away from making treasures, but I feel like we're going to see more Power Stones, than we will treasures. I wonder if we still will once we leave this Dominaria block. I guess we'll see. They definitely feel like they're way more difficult to break. Ironically enough, it probably feels pretty decent to sacrifice a treasure to cast the spell, lose your 0 cost artifact token to make 2 more ones that stick around. This is a little bit more interesting, and I think the fact that it's in blue versus Scrapwork Cohort, which has to be in white because activate ability, that feels a little bit more useful. I think there's a lot of blue artifact decks out there, or at least blue in the commander's mana value. I think I can see this get played a good bit, top of my head. I do think if the sacrificed artifact was legendary draw a card part is weird. I think if it was an instant speed spell, that would be way more useful because you have situations where someone board wipes. Okay, well, I might as well cast putting the Power Stone on my Brea or something and make a couple of Power Stones since she's going to die anyway. I think that's going to be the primary use. People tend to not run legendary artifacts and decks unless they're really impactful. So impactful that you are probably not going to want to be sacrificing them to make 2 Power Stones. So I think that cantrip portion of this seems like it's not going to pop up very, very often, but who knows. Next, we have Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. 3 blue, 4 loyalty Teferi. Whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. Well, that's dumb. Especially because his 0 ability is draw a card. So, functionally, his 0 ability is a +1 ability. So at the very least, you're going to put in a play, draw a card, he goes to 5. That's a pretty decent sized body, particularly for a blue planeswalker. He has a -2, create a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance, which is a very big deal. And whenever you draw a card, put a +1 counter on this creature. And is -12. Target opponent chooses a permanent they control and returns it to its owner's hand. Then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. Okay, so just as a value engine, that's a busted card. I say busted, I don't really mean it's like busted. It's just crazy powerful. If you draw so many cards in blue for the most part, particularly in Commander, this is going to get so many counters on it. The fact that you can just put it down and draw a card and bump its loyalty up makes it tough to remove as well. I mean, just as a generic value piece, that's very strong. Where I think it's probably going to shine is those blue decks that are really good at drawing cards, but less good at winning games. So like the new Joyra, or Riel the Everwise. For those who don't recall, Riel is the one that whenever you discard one or more cards the first time each turn, you draw that many cards. So people tend to run like a bunch of looting effects or rummaging effects, whatever, in red to basically double the draw you get off those things. The problem with a lot of those commanders is basically your option is to play them as ways as something that you use to draw down to a combo piece. So that's maybe not the most fun gameplay, and you're stuck to play combo. At least this gives you something you're building to, right? You drop this Teferi, you draw a bunch of the cards that you always draw in Joyra playing eggs, or you draw in Riel playing your looting cards. This lets you really quickly roll Teferi up to basically blow somebody out. I mean, it doesn't win the game, I guess, but it puts them in a position where like they're not going to be able to respond to you nearly as easily. So that's probably where it's going to shine. Super strong card. I think it's interesting that they're tying the loyalty gain ability to something besides like just rolling it up every turn. So a cool card. Probably going to be super frustrating to play against, but hey, it's a Teferi. What's new? Urza's Command, 2 blue for an instant. You choose 2 modes like usual. Creatures you don't control get -2/-0 till end of turn. It's better in limited than it probably is in Commander, but that's a mode you might use sometimes. You can create a tapped powerstone token, create a tapped 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, so you make a construct, and scry 1 and draw a card. I do like this, again, first blush, I haven't had a chance to think about it, more than I think I like Kai's Command and Commander. Those modes feel more useful. I mean, there's definitely times when someone's going to swing at you with an army of tokens, and that's going to fog them. I mean, I wouldn't run it for that effect, but that's not useless. Making a Power Stone token is a nice thing to tap onto this. Making a construct in the right commander deck is really useful, and then scry 1, draw a card is a pretty good, cantrip-ish effect too. I don't entirely know how much play it's going to see. It's not like crazy strong, but that seems pretty useful in a Breya-ish artifact deck. Any artifact-ish commander that you are playing in blue, it's probably worth a look. Next we have Gix's Command. Similar command. This one's a sorcery, not a instant speed spell. 3 black. Again, choose 2 modes. Put 2 +1 counters and up to 1 creature, and it gains a lifelink until end of turn. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. And each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. Again, this is just not really having a ton of time to reflect on this. So 5 mana to make each opponent sacrifice a creature with the highest power among creatures they control is really good. They've been doing that a lot the last few years. Particularly in Commander, sometimes the problem with edict effects is people tend to have access to tokens or, mana dorks or whatever. If you're just forcing them to sacrifice 1 creature, that can be pretty unimpactful sometimes. It can also be a blowout of playing against the right deck where they only have bombs or they're playing a Voltron deck or whatever. It can be backbreaking, but there's also times where those edict effects don't really accomplish much. When you're forcing them to sacrifice their creature with the highest power among creatures they control, it tends to be way more important. And then whatever modes you pick beyond that, because I feel like that's going to be the mode most people will choose. There's some pretty good value in destroying all the small creatures as well. So 5 mana, you're going to destroy all the 2 drops and the biggest things. That's pretty solid. You can just recur a couple creatures back to your hand, not into play, but in your hand's not terrible. And hey, if you want to alpha strike somebody, 2 counters on 1 creature and give it lifelink, that's probably the least important, unless you're playing in some kind of a +1 counter themed deck. But that's not bad. Top of my head, I think this one's definitely better than the Kaya's Command. We have Ajnod's Harvester. Whenever the Harvester attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. It's a 2-mana construct, colorless for 3/1 with Unearth. Pretty basic Unearth. We don't need to go too much into that. One I will talk about a little bit more, though, is a Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. That's a 7-mana artifact for a 7/5 with Menace and Lifelink and Ward, pay life equal to Phyrexian Flesh Gorger's power. So to even target it, you gotta spend 7 life. So you're basically not going to be targeting it. And it has Lifelink and Menace. That seems really, really good. Is that better than Wormcoil Engine Commander? Yeah, maybe. Unless you're getting synergy from your Wormcoil Engine tokens, maybe. The problem with Wormcoil Engine, and I've got it in 2 decks. I have it in my Glissa deck and in my Veil of the Nightclad deck. The problem with Wormcoil Engine is it feels kind of bad, because number one, everyone's terrified of that card for whatever reason. People just do not like it when you have Wormcoil Engine out, which I guess I get. So they gone to remove it immediately, and then those 2 tokens feel way less impactful. It's nice getting something back, but like it still feels bad spending 6 mana on a Wormcoil Engine, having somebody blow it up, get those 2 tokens that do a little bit, and then someone board wipes 3 turns later, and I mean, it just doesn't feel that great. You drop a Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, it costs 1 more mana, but it's also hitting for 7 versus 6. It's way tougher to block because of Menace. It still has Lifelink. But it's like hexproof. It's not hexproof. Like, there's times people are going to pay that life, but like there's a lot of times they're not because they can't. That seems really, really good to me. Again, in the right deck. This isn't like a generic card you're putting in everything, but like if you're playing an artifact deck or something that cares about lifelink or whatever, that seems really solid. The other part I haven't talked about here is it has a mode called Prototype. So you may cast a spell with a different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps the abilities and types. So it's not really, it's like an inverse kicker. Instead of spending the 7 mana to make it a 7/5, and it has the ward and the menace and the lifelink, you can cast it for 1 and black. That's the prototype cost. And it comes in play as a 3/3. Still has menace, still has lifelink, still has ward. But because of the way the ward is written, pay life equal to the Phyrexian Mana Gorger's Flesh Gorger's power, now it costs him 3 life to hit it versus 7. You paid less, it's less protected, it hits for, less power. I'm curious about Prototype. I like it, but I feel like I don't know how often. I mean, in theory, this is the kind of card that you're like, oh, I can cast it for its Prototype cost early, then later on in the later game, I'm going to cast it for its normal cost. I think that makes sense in Standard and Limited. I don't think that's the kind of thing in Commander that really works out that way. I think there are some cards where that's nice to have that mode. I think in Commander, it's nice to have cards that are good early and have a way to pay more mana to make them even better late. I don't think it's nearly as useful to have them be a card that's primarily a great later game card that you can also play early. And I know that seems like the same thing, but I don't think I want this in my deck when I'm going to cast it as a 3/3, whereas I'm going to cast it as a 7/5. That's a whole different deal. I feel like I'm probably not going to be using that Prototype mode at all, so it's like wasted text maybe, but I could be wrong. That again, we're just going to like my first instinct upon seeing that, and maybe I'm mistaken. We will definitely revisit that one. Mishra's Command Sorcery. Choose 2 modes. This is X and red, so a little bit different version of a command there. Choose target player. They may discard up to X cards. Then they draw a card for each card discarded this way. I read this card actually about an hour or so ago too. First instinct is, you're just always going to use yourself. But actually that's not necessarily true. I think being able to hose somebody who you think has sculpted their hand somehow, they've, taken 2 cards off Fact or Fiction that, they're going to use, or they've tutored something up. I think being able to blast them and make them swap their hand out for something else it's not like, I think, primarily how you'll use it, but I think you'll use that mode more than you think you will. Or at the very least, it's one of those things that's very nice to have the option, even if you use it once every 10 times or 15 times you have it. I think you're going to use it when it's going to be really impactful on the game. So I actually quite like that. This spell deals X damage to target creature, this spell deals X damage to target planeswalker, and target creature gets +X/+O and haste until end of turn. So that's oftentimes an effect you just see by itself, a spell that costs red and X, and you can basically give a creature fire breathing, and something else, trample, haste, first strike, whatever. That's oftentimes a card on its own. So this is a better version of a bunch of those cards. They don't see a ton of play, but they see some play. So that alone is going to, if you're running one of those cards, this is probably an upgrade to a bunch of those. I think this I do think that the Gix's command is good, but I don't know. I wonder if this one might not be the best of the bunch. Maybe not. I need to think about it some more. That's a pretty playable card, though. And the last thing I want to touch on here briefly, I guess we got a land, Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. It comes into play tapped unless you control a legendary green creature, which is something you're going to probably do in Commander pretty frequently. Taps for a green, and you can spend 2 green and tap it and create a 2/2 green bear creature token, then mill 3 cards. So this is the flip side of the meld card that melded Titania, and I guess I'll read Titania quickly just because why not? She's 1 green with reach. For a 3/4, whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, there are 4 or more land cards in your graveyard, and you both own and control Titania and that Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. You exile them and meld them into Titania, Gaia Incarnate. And I guess I might as well just read what she does as well. Vigilance, Reach, Trample, Haste. Her power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. When she ETBs, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And you can spend 3 green and put 4 counters on target land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste, and it is still a land. So anyway, people will probably try to build this as a commander for sure. They'll put it in their existing Titania decks and maybe other lands matters decks, whatever. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature on its own, though, was probably fairly playable, particularly in mono green decks. There's not a ton of downside to it unless you are running a bunch of mana doublers that care about you having specifically forests, but it's going to come into play pretty frequently untapped, more often than not. Still taps for a green, so it isn't even like a mixed colorless mana. And that activated ability where you can make a bear creature token, thematically, I feel like our show editor likes that all on its own, making bears. But it's something you can do on a land to generate some value at a point in the game if you're, out of cards in hand or whatever. There just isn't a ton of downside to it. That said, there's not a ton of upside to it either. And I am someone who plays a mono green deck filled with legends, and I'm not going to run it because it's more valuable to me to have a forest in there that I can tap for additional mana if I have to have an extra pointer lens out, or happen to have a vernal bloom out, or happen to have a, caged sun out or whatever. So I don't think the utility I gain from being able to make a bear creature token once in a while is worth what I lose from having those mana doublers out. If it didn't have that activate only as a sorcery text line, that would be way, way better. But that's where we're at. So, okay. So anyway, that is the cards that have been revealed in the last 24 hours between the command zone and I think there was a stream late Thursday afternoon. There'll be more this weekend, and hey, maybe we'll do another half show next week or something, just in addition to the regular full show. Let us know though if you guys like this format. I'm not going to do it regularly. This isn't going to be something we do all the time, but like if we find ourselves in a weird situation where we can't all 3 get together, would you prefer us to just try to knock off a little small show like this with just me screaming into the void, or is it not that useful to you? So regardless, hope everyone has a good weekend, and we'll see you next week for the regular show. Until then, I am Dana, and this is Commander Central.